Hi guys, welcome to another episode of QQ, brought to you by Second Perspective. I'm Paul Weston, sitting across from me is...
Nathan Smith.
How's it going, guys? Today we are actually going to do something a little bit different. We're going to do a short little review, and in the same sort of podcast is discussion of The Man in the High Tower. It's a...
High Castle.
High Castle. Well, you know. But anyways, so don't worry, I did watch it. I was paying attention to everything else.
That's what he says.
Yeah, well. So anyways, we're going to be doing that. Talk about sort of what we think about the potential of it and all that. So again, the first little review is going to be spoiler free. We'll start freaking out and letting you guys know when we start talking about some of the more in-depth details where we actually will give out spoilers. So Nathan, why don't you give us a quick sort of synopsis on it?
Yeah, I mean, this is a little different. Some of you might be going, The Man in the High Castle. I haven't even heard of that. I mean, it's originally actually a novel by Philip K. Dick, who is the author of Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which is better known as Blade Runner, and various other works of science fiction. So this is actually a series, but this is, of course, just the pilot. So what's happened here is The Man in the High Castle has been adapted by Amazon Studios and Scott Free Productions, which is Ridley Scott's production company. And they made a pilot episode to test, I believe there were a few shows actually, for Amazon Instant Video that were premiered with a pilot. And out of them, they're selecting a few shows to actually create into a series. And this one has been greenlit. We'd heard some things about it, and I decided I'd like to check it out. I'm always a Ridley Scott fan, despite some rocky roads, but we won't go there. So yeah, we wanted to check this out, and what this is The Man in the High Castle is an alternate history science fiction show, and it's set in the 60s as if the Axis powers won World War II, and North America has essentially been divided by both Nazi Germany and the Empire of Japan. And so Japan sort of owns the West Coast, and the Nazi Germany kind of owns a much larger portion past the Rockies, it looks like, based on the maps we saw. And so, yeah, they seem to have a bit of a tentative alliance, and the movie starts off... Oh, sorry, the series, rather, starts off with some... a very interesting scenario right away, just kicking in with a resistance. The idea of this. So we have these, Americans who are living under the rule of former Axis powers, and I think it's a really interesting concept. How much of this comes from the novel, I don't really know. How much the show creators have created themselves, I can't really tell you. But I do think the premise is very interesting. I like the production value of the show. I think, it is just the pilot episode, but I think they did a really good job to selling the world to me. There's a certain look and feel to it. It feels like the 60s or the 50s, but at the same time, it's got a little bit of a science fiction edge to it. They show, some interesting things like some sky trains that definitely did not exist at the time. They show some sort of, like 737 jets, because, now that Nazi Germany has won the war, they have their engineering prowess.
One of my favorite things, actually, was just it's not even the science fiction element, it's just the swastika on the American flag.
Yeah, I mean, there's some really neat details like that. Like, yeah, that's right in the opening credits. That just, you see this American flag with a swastika on it, and that's like, it's a powerful image. And I think this show, for the hour that it is, it shows a lot of those details, and I think it really well. There's a lot of interesting sort of propaganda posters in a lot of the scenes. I think it just has the right feel to it as far as the aesthetics go. I'm a little less keen on other elements of it. I think the writing is a little loose. It's essentially there's two sort of main characters in this. Right away, we're introduced to Joe, who is trying to get a job for what appears to be the underground resistance of America against the Axis powers. And then the other character, and he's in the Nazi Germany side of things, and then we swap over to the West Coast, which is the Empire of Japan, and we meet Juliana, who is an Aikido practicer, and she kind of, I don't really want to reveal too much about her storyline, but she sort of ends up caught in some kind of conspiracy that's going So I like the duality of this character. I think it's really neat seeing the way America has been torn apart and the different cultures of how they've assimilated the Americans into it. But at the same time, I think the minute-to-minute writing of these characters is a little sloppy. There's a lot of supporting cast in this. There's a lot of characters we're just suddenly introduced to with very little, background as to who they are or where they fit in the grand scheme of things. There's some kind of political elements going on here. Unfortunately, none of these things are really touched upon in this sort of hour-long pilot. There's a lot that's introduced and a lot of big ideas, and I think there is potential, but nothing is really revealed to a satisfying level. It is important to know that this is supposed to be a tease. It's supposed to, show the producers and show the audience, like, hey, look, we have ideas, we can be worthy of being made into a show. And I think I'm interested in seeing where that show goes. However, I do think when the actual season of this show premieres, I would like to see a bit of a quality step up in the terms of the writing and the acting. I think that's what's lacking the most. I know, Paul, you're going to talk much more about that than I am, but I do think the sort of moment-to-moment parts of this show are lacking a bit in comparison to, whatever Amazon's rivals might be, which would be, Netflix, AMC, HBO, all these great channels putting out wonderful series that are changing television. So I think in order to really rival that, they have to step it up.
Yeah, many of Nathan's points are very similar to mine. As he said, the thing that I'm most interested in are the larger concepts of the story, where he has basically said, where it's basically if, the Americans and all that stuff, they didn't, win World War II, and basically, it has Hitler when he's old and all that sort of stuff, and so...
I think that's really interesting to see those images.
Yeah, so the images and those concepts themselves are quite interesting. I think a video game's actually done it as well.
I'm sure numerous have.
Yeah, so it's not completely new in that capacity, and they probably also got inspiration from Philip K. Dick. As we said, like a lot of these broader concepts are from Philip K. Dick's story. So that's the thing that I'm most interested in. In terms of the actual sort of filmmaking in that regard, I thought Nathan did say, there weren't too many arcs that were actually solved to a satisfying degree. Although they did have a nice little twist at the end that sort of made a number of things that you see throughout the pilot, they go, oh, okay, and it makes it click a little bit more. So, because I was actually watching it with Nathan, and I said out loud, like, I don't see how they can turn this and give me some sort of satisfying ending at the end, because there was just so much going on, and I felt like there was too much build up and not enough time for them to sort of give me something that didn't feel really rushed, but they did something else that was a little bit different, so I thought they executed that well. In terms of just like sort of cinematography, I thought the wides of the city were really cool. They did show a lot of the more interesting details that Nathan was talking about. However, I was much less of a fan of essentially the writing and the acting. What Nathan said about the minute-to-minute writing, I thought he was, by saying, it was a little loose, was being quite gentle with it. I felt like a ton of the writing was just full of expository.
There is a lot of exposition.
Sorry. And it's just like, the majority of the lines were just sort of, it felt like they couldn't come up with a way of finding any other way of basically outputting the information that the writer felt the audience needed to know. So the characters just said it, and
I think it feels like the creators of this pilot episode, and we'll have to see how things turn out. I mean, this has been greenlit, so we will see it, I guess. There's no date when it will pop up on an Amazon Instant Video or a format. I'm not aware of. Like, maybe they'll release it like Netflix, 10 episodes all at once. But I feel like they went for just sort of throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. And I don't really blame them in a way, because they aren't aware of, they don't have a longer arc right now. They obviously they have ideas because they set things up. They set a lot of things up. but they're just throwing in, it seems like, as much as they can, and some of it seems to work, some of it doesn't. And hopefully when the show actually premieres, they'll start trimming away the excess and really focus on the more interesting aspects of this.
Well, yeah, and Nathan's definitely right. They were throwing crap at the wall and being like, I hope something sticks. And some of the stuff is interesting, but my biggest concern is I felt like there were very few scenes that show sort of a grasp on the concept of just subtlety, and even if the series comes out, even if the writing and the acting improves by like 15-20%, I don't think that's enough for me to actually continue watching this series. Like, the potential of this pilot and this series is really high, but just sort of the execution on, I feel like, the fundamental elements of films and stories in general, that being the acting and the writing, just were not at a level that would keep me entertained and make me want to watch it, especially when there's so many good shows out there. Like, we've probably been spoiled with like Game of Thrones and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, TV is at a really big place right now, and this is why Amazon wants in. They have a lot of money, they have a lot of power, and they want to step into the market. And, I think they're, maybe not off to the greatest of starts. I haven't seen, every show that they've sort of put pilots out for, but I am intrigued by this, and I think that they could have a franchise that would be worth paying attention to, but it really depends on what they're willing to put into it from here on out. Now that they've got their sort of concept, I've seen this before, Battlestar Galactica, I was mentioning this to Paul, it's one of my favorite shows, and it had a similar approach. Like, there was, it was much longer, it had like a 3-hour miniseries, but it kind of went for the throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. But it was a much higher quality, I feel, than this. But when the actual first season aired, there were quite a few things that were trimmed back. Certain characters were cut out because they weren't interesting, or the creators thought it would be a waste of time in going forward. And so hopefully some of that care gets taken into this series. Now, it's important to note, we aren't going to rate this. We decided that it's not really worth grading because nothing's really complete. We're not getting real character arcs. Everything, it's all just set up, really. So we're just kind of going by our impressions. I'm interested by it, and I do think I want to watch the show when it airs. But like I said, I think there are certain elements that are a little loose right now, and in order to keep me as a viewer, they have to sort of nail it down. And mostly it's on a really, the more mechanical parts of the show, is they need to get the writing down. They need to make sure their actors are delivering, because there's, quite a few of the actors felt a little hokey to me. Like, it definitely,
a little hokey is being,
it's definitely there. I mean, yeah, some are worse than others. Some are worse than others. I quite liked Alexa Davalos. She plays Juliana, and I would say she's probably the most main protagonist of the two. She gets more screen time. And I like her, and I thought her arc was interesting. There's some events that she goes through where I'm not really sure the grand scheme of things why they happen. We'll talk about that more in a bit. But either way, I like her story, so hopefully I would like to see more of the supporting cast be on her level. But I'm interested, so I think there's potential. We'll see where it goes.
For me, I'll give it 1, maybe 2 episodes. Just to see if it's improved on a minute-to-minute mechanical level, as Nathan said. Like, because, I mean, I can't think of I can think right now, 2 or 3 actors, supporting actors that Nathan and I looked at each other and kind of went, like, that was pretty cringeworthy acting. If you listen to the podcast at all, you realize that, or you probably know that I love actors. I think they're just like most brave people I know just to go and do it.
You love them and you hate them. Oh, how you do.
I love-hate relationship. But so I understand exactly how hard it is. But that being said, it feels like if the writing and the acting get better to a fairly substantial level, then sure, I'll keep watching, because the concepts themselves are really interesting, but I have my suspicions that I won't be watching this series because I just don't have faith that they're going to get it to a level where I would rather watch this than 2 or 3 other series like Game of Thrones or something like that, because as usual we all have. We can only watch 3 or 4 TV series, even if we have the time. So
they say.
Yeah, or maybe you got more time than the rest of us.
So, thank you for listening to the non-spoiler sort of little, I don't want to call it a review, but discussion, I guess, about this. We are looking to maybe try more of this. I would like to, look at series, like Game of Thrones as a season as a whole. It's a little easier to actually grade and talk about. So we'll see how things go in the future, but we're looking to bring you more diverse content as we go forward.
Yeah.
So now we're going to move on to the spoiler section, and here, just like our normal spoiler discussions, we are going to talk about aspects of this episode. So if you haven't seen it, please stop listening now, unless you don't care about spoilers, in which case, get ready for them, because they're coming.
Yeah, they're coming right to your face.
So yes,
what?
That's a good warning, so let's talk about it.
Yeah. Right at the beginning of the intro, I thought it was a really cool intro.
That is a very good intro. So yeah, I am a huge fan. It's weird. Like, I watched some of these shows, like Game of Thrones. I think another one was Band of Brothers. I love HBO's intros. And it's not just because, I know they're long. Like, I think most of them probably have to average 3 to 5, maybe not 5 minutes, but like 3 or 4 minutes. Some of them are quite long. But I like them because when I sit down and watch these intros, they pull me into the world right away and get me ready for the show. It's like the music's there, the audios and the aesthetics are there, like everything's there to just pull me in, and then I'm ready for what's to come. And I think that they do that right out of the gate. I think that's really good. They have a really interesting beginning. They show like a world map, they show lots of war footage, and then they show this sort of alternate history taking place, and I think that's really strong, and it evokes feelings.
I think this intro was probably like a minute, maybe a minute and a half.
Yes, it wasn't that long.
I thought the intro did everything that Nathan said, and I did it in less than a minute and a half. At least it felt like a minute and a half. Maybe if I watch it 10 more times, then it won't feel like that. But I don't know if I'm necessarily a fan of a 3 or 4 minute intro.
Yeah, it's fine.
Every time I watch a show, I just I try and skip through the.
I got through that Game of Thrones intro every time.
Every time, no.
I love it.
No, not me. I like hearing the first 4 or 5 notes of the instrument, and then okay, I'm ready.
So moving beyond that, I also thought, again from a sort of structural standpoint, I think this show gets to a good running start right out of the gate. So,
I can agree with that.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. We're sort of thrust into this world. We meet Joe, and he's sort of acting a little shady. Like he's sort of he's on a train and he's kind of hiding away from some.
Before we do that, before he does that, he gets that little note from the guy in the theater.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, correct.
My one sort of alarm that started going off is that people don't enter and exit theaters like that. And it's just, I don't know. Maybe I'm just being weird, but I don't like that kind of cliche. And it's and if you're trying to not be suspicious, why the hell would you leave a theater after some guy just said, anyways, it just, that was sort of a warning sign for me for the writing being a little bit
I think though, going right to the sort of element of an American resistance force was really good because immediately you get the dynamic of what's going on in the world and how these people are surviving. You see some interesting things. You see some I don't really know what to call them. Maybe secret police. I don't know what they would be called here, but you see them sort of roaming the streets and Joe's avoiding them, and then he meets this guy in a car repair place. This was all it pulled me in. I'm immediately interested in what's happening. And then, of course, things go bad for what's happening here, and there's a few scenarios that play out where you're kind of wondering about Joe. Well, you find out by that ending twist at the end that, Joe is very much an undercover. He's actually
a double agent.
Yeah, he's working for the Nazi powers. To what end, we don't really know. I would guess, the only thing I can guess out of all this is it has something to do with those films.
I did have Man, I just feel like I'm just pooping on this pilot, but I didn't mind that beginning section. I thought it was quite interesting. And you realize why Nazis come in and just start shooting the hell out of everyone.
And it's harsh. There's the scene, which I thought was really nice the way it was done. The camera sort of pans across and shows a bunch of prisoners kneeling down, shows some soldiers behind them loading their guns, and then you just start hearing gunshots go off. It's very effective. It's very dark. It evokes, some feelings out of me.
The only... And, one way that they definitely sort of cut that expectation that he is a double agent is having Joe shoot one of the soldiers. So
Yes.
for me, I didn't see it until the end, which I thought was clever. Nathan's smarter than me, so he still thought that was a possibility. But even on my first way through, having the Nazis suddenly appear out of nowhere when they're supposedly really good, this resistance group is supposed to be good at being hidden, just felt really not... It felt like it was very convenient for the writer. And it makes a lot of sense when you realize that he's a double agent.
When the ending comes.
But for me, like on my first pass, it kicked me out of the world. And I just found, I wish there was a different way that the person could have done that. Like maybe Joe was being followed or something. It's just like something that could have kept me going and not kicked me out of the world. That I thought they were doing almost a really good job of setting up. Right?
I mean, it was a very interesting twist. It's interesting that that's the moment they decided to end the pilot on. Is that, and it actually reminds me of how Battlestar did its miniseries. I won't go into spoilers on that, but it had a similar sort of setup where there was deceitful characters, and then the ending moment was showing another deceitful character, and you're like, ooh, and so. It's setting up a sort of feeling of espionage and things, a very underground feeling for everything that's happening, is that people are going to be lying with their emotions and their intentions. And I think that's a fitting sort of theme to run through in a show about people being prisoners to two empires. It gets a little rougher from here. I think a lot of... I like... Juliana's intro scene where she's doing, I'm going to say it wrong. What was it? Aikido?
Aikido.
Okay.
Ikea.
I almost wanted to. Yeah,
no,
I almost wanted to say something wrong. Aikido. Yeah, I actually like that because it immediately established her as a character who's capable, and I like that. We get a nice intro to her. She's overpowering a man twice her size, and she does it with a lot of grace, which I think is very funny. I like that. It gets a little rougher. She meets her sister. Some of these scenes start to get kind of choppy, I think, in this middle portion of the show.
I think that just sort of signifies sort of my issue with it. It's like her sister, who apparently she hasn't seen for weeks, shows up. She runs in the store, goes like, "Oh, sister, I've missed you. Okay, I gotta go. Bye." And you're like,
yeah, and there's a lot of this. There's a lot of this sort of quick in and out from the scenes. Like a lot of characters arrive at a location saying they have an intention, and then they're like, oh, I have to go, and then they disappear. It happens, she goes to her parents' place, Juliana does, or rather her mother's place, because it appears her father has died in the war.
Yeah.
But yeah, she goes there to deliver them tea, and they have a brief conversation. They bring up something about an accident with her, and you're like, okay, what's that all about? And then she's like, oh, I gotta go, and you're like, okay. And unfortunately, we'll never know what that is. We will know what that's about. We don't by the end of this pilot episode. There's a lot of elements in here where I feel like, again, I mentioned this in the non-spoiler review, is they're just throwing things at the wall, but it also gets a little confusing, especially when they start going to scenes of the supporting cast. There's this element of politics between the Nazi powers and the Japanese Empire, and apparently they're a little bit at odds with one another, and I actually quite like that. I think that's an interesting element.
I think it might be the most interesting element. You could probably make an entire series on just that.
And I was thinking, like, those two characters, I don't even know what
there's so many people, there's one Japanese guy, one German guy.
Yeah, they're talking at a table about the princess coming to visit on Nazi soil, and I thought that was really interesting because there's tension between these two superpowers, and it's clear as the show goes on that Hitler is apparently sick.
He's got Parkinson's.
Yeah, he's got Parkinson's, and there's a whole bunch of talk that once he steps down, someone else will step up, who we don't know yet, but that war will happen between Japan and Germany. And I think this is a really interesting tension because it goes to show that not only are the Americans fighting for their own freedom, but then you have these two superpowers who conquered them also warring with each other.
It's kind of a nice cheeky little way of saying, like, yeah, just because the Axis powers won the war, it doesn't mean there's any peace.
Exactly, and it doesn't even mean they're getting along.
Yeah.
Much like, in the real history, how, the Americans the Allies won the war, and then suddenly this great divide happened between Russia, and with communism and the West. So there's some interesting parallels there where it's like whoever wins the war is still at odds with each other. And I like this. And these elements are interesting, but there's just a lot of quick scenes talking about these things, and unfortunately there's no real payoff by the end of it. Now, of course, again, just one pilot episode. We're not talking about a season here. Hopefully these things show up, because I was actually looking forward to seeing this princess arrive, because they made a big deal out of it. That never happened. We see, the big element of this film, I guess we should talk about, is this The Man in the High Castle's films, these propaganda films that Alexa Davalos' character, Juliana, comes across. Her sister brings this to her. Joe does too, yes. But the first time we see it is Juliana gets it, and she plays it, and it is propaganda American footage of, or maybe just Allied footage in general, of the Allies winning the war. And we get this brief little mention that it's not fake, it's real. And that
a character says it, right?
Yeah, that's what I mean. There was a mention of that, and that triggered a big interest in me. That immediately got a little bit of a hook in me, because I think that's an interesting concept. We know from the setup of this, as we're seeing the way North America is now, that the Allies clearly lost, but now we're hearing a possible theory that they didn't lose, which leads you to wonder, well, then how is the world the way it is now? So I think this is quite interesting. Unfortunately, there's no payoff yet, but I do think this is a very interesting hook for a show. And if I had to say what was the greatest interest to me, it would be that. I was actually genuinely interested in figuring out what is the deal with these films. Both the characters end up, you find out, carrying these films. So Joe, who flees in the truck at the beginning after the little incursion, ends up, he realizes, he pops open the truck, and it's kind of funny. They talk about what was in there, like water or coffee makers. Yep. And it turns out they are coffee makers, so I was like, well, that's kind of funny. But then, of course, he knew there was something in there, and he definitely knew, because he's actually a Nazi. But he pops open, some hidden compartment under the truck, and boom, there's another film canister. And I genuinely was interested by this aspect of the film. I don't know how long this can pay off. Like, I feel like this is something that needs to be sort of discussed and revealed
in the next couple episodes.
Yeah, or in the next season. Like, they can spend a season building up to that, I could see. But it's like, it's one of those things where it's a good hook for a pilot episode, so I think that works. But I think that just a lot of the in-between stuff gets pretty messy. There's just a lot going on with a lot of people who I don't know their names. I don't really care that much for them. A good example is like
the T-boy.
Juliana's, the T-boy. Oh, yeah. But Juliana's boyfriend, I don't really care that much about him as a character, and yet, he's given a bit of a beat down at the end, and I feel we're supposed to be sympathetic, but I didn't really care.
Yeah. I did find his sort of jewelry arc potentially interesting, where it's like they don't want jewelry, okay, because it sort of speaks a little bit to the world and like how they're basically just like gun makers. That's kind of interesting, but his acting, a lot of it was just sort of...
It's rough.
It's rough, and it feels like a lot of it, he's trying to show us he's concerned. He's trying to show us he's angry. Mm-hmm. He's trying to show... And instead of actually just sort of... Without getting into like the whole like actor parts, it's just...
And part of it could be the writing. I don't want to throw it all at the actor, because I do feel the writing is pretty uneven as well. So, like, there is definitely some acting.
Actually, it's always the director's fault, because the director always...
absolutely.
If it's a bad performance, it's still the director's fault.
And this is what we mean about rough edges. Is there's definitely some burrs on this sort of, what should be a nice cylindrical object, and it's not. It's kind of rough around the edges. So
I do think, like, if it was a stronger performance, we would care at the end. Although I wasn't really sure why the Japanese people just started beating the living crap out of him at the end.
Well, I mean, I think that, he's connected to someone who is now suspected as being working for the underground. So, I mean, it's one of those things where it's like the secret police, as they take you away in the night and nobody ever hears from you again. Obviously, that it's not quite to that degree. At least I don't think so. I don't think he's dead. But I he
was thrown in the back of a truck by an end of it.
He is, yeah. But I do like the brutality of the show. Like, that's one of the things that stood out for me, is like I think they evoke some strong images of how, Nazi Germany behaved, things like the concentration camps, the secret police. I think this is effectively realized in this world. And then, the Japanese also have their own sort of thing going on with that too, because they're actually the ones who haul him away. I don't know his name, to be honest.
Jewelry guy.
Jewelry guy. Yeah, I'm less interested in Joe, except for the hook that he is,
It's a pretty big hook.
It is a good hook. It's big. I think his arc is kind of boring, though, like, for most of this episode. He doesn't have as much screen time as Juliana, but, like, most of the time he's just driving. I did get a little more interested once I started to suspect that he might still be playing a sort of, I'm actually double agent card, and it turned out he was, so that was genuinely good.
Why don't we talk, like, the last thing we can talk about is the hospital scene.
Yeah.
Because I think that was the one scene that gave me hope that there can be some, like, strong performances, but mostly, like, a certain element of subtlety. I think it did give away...
It gave a sting to me, I'll say that, because I expected one thing and got delivered the opposite, and it gave me a little bit of a hurt, and I was like, oh.
In case you guys are sort of forgetting about what we're talking about, it's the scene where Joe gets a blown tire on his semi. He gets, he goes to the side of the road, a police car comes, and I'll get to it in a minute, because I think Nathan has some interesting some points to bring up to it, but, there's considering he's supposed to be terrified of being caught, and basically, because he gets told like 10 times in the first 2 minutes of the pilot, he's going to get killed if he gets caught by the cops, or Nazis or whatever. There's surprisingly very little tension in this scene, and that
kind of very relaxed.
Yeah, and it felt kind of odd that he would. So that's an issue. We'll talk about that. But the thing that I thought was most interesting is when there start ashes in the sky.
And I didn't know they were ashes at first. That's what caught me.
The one time I'm quicker than Nathan. As soon as I saw it, I knew it was ash. Largely because I've been around a number of like campfires and stuff, and I've seen it. And just knowing there's Nazis and like they just do horrible things to people.
So the way I thought it was going to go is he mentions that he's never been outside New York. Now, whether that's a lie or not, after you find out this character is deceitful, who knows? But either way, he mentions he's never been outside New York, and suddenly white little petals, is what I thought they were, start falling down, and I was like, what are those, like cherry orchards? And I'm like, it's like a thing about nature and maybe how like the country's still beautiful. And then in a very nonchalant, like straight delivery manner, the cop is just like, oh no, that's a hospital. They burn people there. And I was just
it doesn't burn people, it burns cripples,
yes,
undesirables.
Sorry, yeah. Like, I didn't know the direct line, but yes, they burn undesirable people.
It's the first one was cripples,
and he delivers that in the most like this is an average day out here, and
like, oh yeah, it rains a lot in Vancouver.
Yeah, and it just kind of like it just left me a little bit like, ow, like that was sharp. I thought that was a really good moment. In fact, that might have been the sort of peak of emotion for me in the show. I thought that was
for me. It was
It was really interesting. A really well constructed scene, actually. Like that was nice.
And that's what I was hoping, just like one or two more of them.
Yeah,
for
absolutely.
Pilot, for me to have a little more faith, but that was just a really sort of interesting scene. And
I would say, before you go on, the other scene that effectively stood out for me is when Juliana pops in the propaganda film. This is, I think, mostly with her acting, because I think she is a fairly good actress.
She's definitely the strongest one, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. I like the look on her face, because like it was a really interesting sort of way to show it. Is she pops in, she pulls out a projector, and she pops in the reel, and you don't see what's on the screen, but she suddenly gets this look of like shock, and she just kind of hunches down in a very innocent position and is sitting there fixated on the screen. And she watches it again and again, and only after like 4 or 5 times of scenes of her like almost crying watching it do you start to see the images. And I actually felt I knew what was being shown. I was like, it's got to be a propaganda film about like the Allies winning or something like that. And that actually, I felt that in her performance, and that scene gave me the feels, like that worked too.
I enjoyed that scene. I didn't realize it was a propaganda film. But the thing that sort of I was kind of hung up on, but while she was doing that, was that the scene before. somehow her sister finds her in the alleyway.
Oh yeah, I mean that's
which is just stupid. Like, and that's the second time that's happened.
Yes, yeah.
And then she runs. The cops find her and shoot her. So this is what I mean, sort of like where the writing just okay now we need this character to die, and I don't think it's the actor's fault in any way. But then she goes sees her sister, and she gets more emotional about the film than she does seeing her sister being shot, essentially knowing that she's dead on the floor. If you want like a state of shock or something, whatever, okay, great. But like just looking at her, I was like, it was like she saw a bunch of cops in an alleyway, being like, "Ooh, I shouldn't get caught." Not, holy shit, they just shot my sister, who I'm supposed, through the few moments that we've seen, she's supposed to care a lot about. And so like I was still sort of hung up on that. I'm like, that's so stupid. And then when she started getting a little bit teary, that she was getting more emotional about that, it just felt a little bit yeah. So I can see why that moment would work for you. And if it were not right before a moment that I really did not resonate with, or I thought was very sort of jarring, I would have had a stronger emotion on that. But so going quickly back to the hospital scene.
Yes.
The one thing I want to say is like, I think the thing I know it was only after Nathan said it to me where he started to realize that during sort of the hospital scene he realized that he is probably
the cop. You should say that.
So the cop scene. It's just the hospital was just the most impactful part for me. The cop scene, when he said there was no tension, and that's how you realize he could probably be a double agent or something of the like. That's a problem for that scene, and I don't understand why there wasn't any attention because his arc for the most part was so, as you say, kind of boring, and like they even show a cop, like late at night a cop going behind him and all that sort of stuff. So when you get to that scene, yeah, it had a great moment at the end, but at the beginning, it didn't sort of keep that illusion alive, and I realized that's when I started having sort of, I started to question sort of Joe himself as well. So it's weird. It had the strongest moment and quite a weak moment, like literally 15 seconds beside each other.
Yeah, and I mean the show is kind of just a hodgepodge in general like that. I think another scene I just want to briefly bring up again, like I don't understand why it happened, and maybe there's a reason, maybe that isn't, but it just seemed kind of like, okay, I don't know why. Is how Juliana's bags get stolen. I know you didn't seem to be as bothered by that, but I don't understand what that did for the script. Like, I understand that allowed her to meet Joe because she didn't have any money, and then therefore he had. But that's what I mean is like that just feels like another writer contrivance. He has to set something up in order to force two people together, and it's not something that feels like it really serves a purpose. Like that sort of arc has happened, like someone befriends another character, but it turns out they actually have a malicious thing. They don't even have to be a big character, they can be briefly introduced, but I don't feel that it was done in an effective way. So when it happened, I was like, okay, is this set up so that something's going to happen to her, or is this just like a random thing? Because if it's random, it just felt pretty weak to me.
And they spent a lot of time on it too, like with her talking to that person and sort of giving that person a fair amount of time. Like they give him more time than just sort of a passing moment, but not enough time to sort of justify being a bigger.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. Yeah, right? It's like
so it felt really kind of odd.
Either go one way or the other.
And it kind of goes to like story clarity, where now we're confused. Like, are we supposed to realize this is sort of a brief moment, or are we supposed to take a mental note, like, this person is really important? Because at first I thought, oh shit, she knows about the film or something like that, and this is another thing that she's gonna have to deal with on her way to Cannon City. But then after some while, you're like, well, maybe it's not, and so it confuses the story clarity. One thing I did want to mention, sort of like on a sort of writing level, not just on this sort of pilot, but of all writing. Mostly the best kind of writing feels like everything is surprising yet inevitable. And that's the words of Aristotle, and he usually says that about endings, where the ending should feel surprising yet inevitable. But I feel like almost any moment, or at least the majority of moments, should feel that way in a script. And I think this is why I had such a big problem with this pilot, is because nothing felt. Some of it felt as somewhat surprising, but nothing felt inevitable. It felt all very forced, and that's why that's what my qualms are about the writing. And so, that's I guess my big issue is I don't. It's not something you just like wake up one day and be like, suddenly know how to write something that feels quite inevitable, because there's a reason why people spend just years writing novels, screenplays, all this sort of stuff, and it's to find ways that to make writing feel sort of organic, because otherwise writing just naturally feels forced. And so that's why if they spent all this time making this pilot and it still couldn't quite make it feel
well, we don't really know the story behind the pilot.
So like
it's worth noting too that shows switch people all the time. Switch showrunners, switch writers, switch directors, especially directors. I mean, generally like one or two directors per episode. So I mean, it's worth noting that these flaws can be fixed. They totally
absolutely.
Can be.
I just have less faith because
and
with
fair.
most stories and seasons, like writers do change and all that sort of stuff, but like a lot of shows start strong but slowly get weaker because they have less and less time to write strong arcs, and it becomes more difficult to come up with new content. And so that's why just writing in general, I'm a little worried. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, we'll have to see how it turns out. I feel like I'm more interested in the larger implications and things going on, like the larger moving parts. And if they can clean up the smaller pieces that are moving around, maybe we'll get a good show out of this. I think right now it's a pretty good show as a pilot. But again, when it comes out, I expect a higher quality in order to maintain viewership. Because if it stays on this, I'm probably going to lose interest. But I do think that there is some hidden potential here. And I think, above all else, I think it's pretty unique. Like, I mean, not in the sense of, like, this hasn't been done before, but just in the sense that I don't really feel that there's a lot on television that's really doing what this is trying to do. It kind of feels like a nice breath of fresh air to me. So I think that's cool. I think that it could lead to something that could have a following as long as they clear up these issues. So we'll have to see. I'm assuming it'll take another year for production for the season. So maybe
filmmaking.
Yeah. So I mean, like sometime spring next year, if our channel is still alive and kicking and not in the curb, hopefully we can maybe bring this to you. I'll maybe twist Paul's arm and try and get him to watch the whole season, and if it's good, maybe Amazon has a way in. We'll have to find out.
I hope they do. I am all for great shows, and that's only why I'm so hard, is because I want them to take themselves as the highest bar as they can. So
yeah, I guess that about wraps up everything I have to say. So thanks for listening, guys. This was relatively experimental, but let us know what you think, because we're thinking of trying out some other content. There's a lot of entertainment mediums out there. Video games, TV shows, I mean, they're all big, so we want to talk about a lot of different things, and we want to know what you guys want to hear.
Yeah, let us know what tends to be your favorite part to listen to. If you do enjoy us rambling about particular parts, or if you're more interested in us sort of breaking down like very particular moments of stories and so on and so forth. So, yeah, let us know, and we hope you hear the next one.
Thanks a lot.